Chapter 1. The First Clashes. When China met America. The sea was cold. The wind cut through their clothes, sharp as a knife. But they didn't turn back. Thousands of Chinese men stood on the ship's deck, their eyes fixed on the horizon. America. A new land. A new life. They had left everything behind. Families, homes, even their names. They had heard the stories. Gold, mountains of it, riches waiting to be taken. Gamsan. Gold Mountain, they called it. And now, after months at sea, they had arrived. San Francisco. 1849. The city was alive, pulsing with energy. Horses pulled carts through muddy streets. Men with dusty boots and greedy eyes filled the saloons. The sound of hammers, voices, and gunshots mixed in the air. The Chinese immigrants stepped off the ship, their feet touching American soil for the first time. They didn't speak the language. They didn't know the rules. But they were ready to work. They dug into the earth with their bare hands, searching for gold. But the best land was already taken. The gold was harder to find than they had imagined. They took other jobs, washing clothes, cooking food, building railroads. They worked harder than anyone, faster, cheaper. And that was the problem. The American miners watched them with anger. "Too many Chinese," they muttered, "taking our jobs." The first fight broke out near the river. A group of Chinese miners found a small pile of gold dust. They cheered, excited. They had worked for weeks, and now, finally, a reward. But then, the Americans came. "That's ours," one man said. His voice was calm, too calm. The Chinese miners shook their heads. "No, we worked here." A gun was pulled, a shot fired. The dust of gold fell to the ground, forgotten. More attacks followed. Burned houses, broken bones, dead bodies in the river. The police did nothing. And then came the law. 1882. The Chinese Exclusion Act. For the first time in U.S. history, a law was passed to stop an entire people from entering the country. No more Chinese workers, no more families, no more dreams. Posters appeared in the streets. "The Chinese must go." Mobs formed. They pulled men from their homes, set fire to businesses, chased them out of towns. Many fled to Chinatown, small corners of the city where they could be safe. But even there, life was hard. The immigrants wrote letters back home. "Don't come," they warned their families. "It is not the land of gold. It is the land of suffering." Yet, still, they stayed. They had no choice. They built America's railroads. They worked in its factories. They cooked its food. They helped shape the nation. But the nation did not welcome them. Decades passed. The wounds did not heal. The tension did not fade. And so, the first chapter in the story of China and America was written, not in ink, but in blood. Chapter 2. Cold War Shadows. Fighting without a war. The air was thick with smoke. Explosions lit up the night. The ground shook. A young American soldier pressed himself into the frozen earth, gripping his rifle. His breath came fast. His heart pounded in his chest. Somewhere in the darkness, they were coming. The year was 1950. The place, Korea. A country divided, a war without end. The United States fought on one side, backing the South. China, on the other, supporting the North. They never declared war, but make no mistake, this was war. The battle raged. Snow turned red. Bodies fell in the cold. The Americans had arrived first, pushing the North Koreans back, almost to China's border. Victory seemed near, but then everything changed. China entered the war, not officially, not with an army, but with volunteers. Hundreds of thousands of men dressed in padded coats, carrying rifles, marching through the mountains. The Americans weren't ready. They thought the war was almost over. Now, it was only beginning. The Chinese soldiers attacked in waves. First one group, then another, then another. The Americans fired. Bullets ripped through the night. But still, the soldiers came. More and more, endless waves in the snow. A retreat, then another. The Americans fell back, city by city. It was no longer about winning. It was about surviving. Months passed. The war dragged on. In the end, no one won. Korea remained divided. Two countries, split by a single line, the 38th parallel. Two enemies staring at each other across the border. And the Cold War had only just begun. Years later, it happened again. This time, Vietnam. The jungle was hot. The air smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and rain. American helicopters roared overhead. On the ground, soldiers moved carefully, watching the trees. Every shadow was a danger. Every step could be their last. But this was no ordinary war. No tanks rolling forward. No front lines. No clear enemy. The soldiers fought ghosts, fighters that appeared, attacked, and vanished into the jungle. The United States supported the South. China and the Soviet Union helped the North. The pattern repeated. Another war, another battlefield. But still, no direct fight between the two great powers. Yet, China's influence grew. The world was changing. Back in Washington, the American government watched nervously. China was no longer just a country. It was an idea, a symbol, a challenge. Communism was spreading. Would it stop? Could it stop? Tensions rose. Missiles in Cuba, spies in the shadows, a race to the moon. For decades, the Cold War shaped the world. A war without battles. A war without peace. And in the middle of it all stood China and the United States. Watching, waiting, fighting, without ever truly fighting. Chapter 3. The Taiwan Crisis. The island caught between giants. The ocean was calm. The waves moved slowly, reflecting the moonlight like silver. But beneath the surface, danger. A U.S. warship floated in the dark, its engines quiet, its guns loaded. Sailors stood ready, eyes on the horizon, hands on their weapons. Across the water, a Chinese destroyer did the same. The two sides did not speak, did not fire. But one wrong move, and everything could change. The year was 1949. The war was over. But the peace? That was still far away. On the mainland, the Communist Party had won. Mao Zedong's army marched through Beijing. The red flag rose high. China was now communist, and Mao was its new leader. But not everyone accepted it. The old government, the nationalists, had lost the war. They had fled, 2 million people, soldiers, politicians, families. Across the sea, they reached a small island, Taiwan. It was not just a place to hide, it was a last hope. From there, they dreamed of taking back China. Beijing called them traitors. Mao wanted to end this battle for good. Taiwan had to be taken by any means necessary. But there was a problem. The United States. America had a choice: support Taiwan or stay out of it. At first, they hesitated. Taiwan was small. The Cold War was just beginning. The U.S. had its own problems. Then, war broke out in Korea. The United States changed its mind. It could not let another country fall to communism. It had to stop China. In 1950, U.S. warships sailed into the Taiwan Strait. A wall of steel. A warning to Beijing. If China attacked Taiwan, it would face the United States. Mao was furious, but he was not ready to fight the U.S. directly. The invasion was stopped. For now. Years passed. The tension did not fade. Then, in 1954, China made its move. Boom. A missile hit the sea near Taiwan. Another followed, and another. China was attacking the small islands near Taiwan. Bombs rained down. Soldiers prepared to land. Taiwan's government was afraid. Was this the beginning of an invasion? The U.S. answered. More ships, more planes, more threats. The two powers stood face to face once again. Would they fight this time? Would the Cold War become a real war? The world held its breath. Then, silence. At the last moment, China stopped. The crisis was over. But only for now. In 1958, it happened again. China attacked the islands once more. The sky filled with fire. Taiwan soldiers held their ground, waiting. Would the U.S. come to help? American ships moved closer. Would they fire? Would they attack? China saw them. And once again, it stepped back. 3 times, the world had been on the edge of war. Taiwan remained free. But Beijing never forgot. Decades passed. Taiwan grew stronger. It became rich, democratic, different from the mainland. But China never gave up its claim. To Beijing, Taiwan was not a separate country. It was still China. And one day, it would return. The United States continued to protect Taiwan, but never officially. It did not recognize Taiwan as a country. It did not put troops there, but it always watched, always warned China not to act. And now? The tension remains. More ships, more missiles, more threats. The world still watches, still waits. One mistake, one wrong move could mean disaster. And Taiwan, once again, is caught between giants. Chapter 4. Nixon goes to China. From enemies to friends? The plane cut through the gray sky, flying low over the rooftops of Beijing. Below, streets stretched in every direction. People stood still, their eyes lifted toward the sky. Soldiers in green uniforms watched in silence. Inside the plane, Richard Nixon sat quietly. His hands rested on his lap. His heart pounded in his chest. He was about to make history. For years, China and the United States had been enemies. They had fought in Korea. They had threatened war over Taiwan. They had lived in the shadow of the Cold War, never speaking, never meeting. Now, that was about to change. The wheels touched the runway. The plane slowed, then stopped. A door opened, and Nixon stepped out. The cold air hit his face. He adjusted his coat and took a deep breath. On the ground, Chinese officials stood waiting. Their faces were serious, their hands folded behind their backs. And then he appeared. Mao Zedong, the man who had led the communist revolution, the man who had called the U.S. the enemy, the man who had fought against everything Nixon believed in. Now they stood face to face. The cameras flashed. The world held its breath. Then Nixon extended his hand. A pause. Mao looked at him. A small smile formed on his lips. He reached out and shook Nixon's hand. It was just a handshake. Just a simple moment. But it changed everything. For over 20 years, no American leader had stepped foot in China. No American diplomat had met with its government. Now, in a single moment, the wall between the two nations had cracked. They walked inside. The talks began. The discussions were careful, slow. Both sides knew the risks. Mao and Nixon sat in a large, simple room. No translators, no officials, just two men speaking through an interpreter, trying to end years of silence. Nixon spoke first. The world cannot be safe if China and the United States do not talk. Mao nodded. You are right. Their conversation lasted only an hour, but it was enough. Nixon spent a week in China. He met with Premier Zhou Enlai. He visited the Great Wall. he watched a performance of traditional Chinese opera. And at the end of his trip, he and Mao agreed on something that had once seemed impossible. The United States and China would open relations. They would stop seeing each other as enemies. They would begin, for the first time, to talk. It was not a friendship. Not yet. But it was a start. Trade began. American businesses saw an opportunity. A country of nearly 1 billion people, a market unlike any other. They started selling goods to China. China, in return, opened its doors to the world. Factories grew. Cities expanded. The economy woke up. Within a few years, China was no longer the isolated country it had been. It was changing, modernizing, preparing to take its place in the global economy. But there was a question. How long would this friendship last? Some believed it was the beginning of a new era, a future where China and the U.S. would work together, grow together. Others were not so sure. The Cold War was still alive. Taiwan was still a problem. And deep down, both sides knew. This was not a perfect friendship. But for now, it didn't matter. Nixon left China knowing one thing. History had changed, and the world would never be the same. Chapter 5. The Economic Rivalry. Who will rule the market? The streets of Shanghai glittered at night. Towers of glass and steel rose into the sky, their lights blinking like stars. Below, cars moved in every direction. A city that never slept. A country that had changed. Not long ago, China was a land of farmers and small factories. Now, it was different. Bigger, richer, more powerful. Across the ocean in New York, the feeling was different. The United States had led the world economy for decades. It had the biggest companies, the strongest banks, the most advanced technology. But now, it felt the pressure. China was rising. Fast. It started quietly. Factories in China made cheap clothes, toys, electronics. Companies in the U.S. saw an opportunity. Cheap labor. Huge profits. American businesses sent their work overseas. More factories opened. More jobs moved. China became the world's factory. Millions of workers. Thousands of products. Everywhere. At first, the U.S. was happy. Goods were cheap. Businesses made money. The economy grew. But then, something changed. China didn't just want to make things. It wanted to sell things. Compete. Lead. New companies appeared. Huawei, Alibaba, TikTok. Not just factories, but businesses that could challenge the biggest American brands. Skyscrapers rose in Beijing. Bullet trains raced through the countryside. High-tech cities grew overnight. China was no longer just copying the world. It was creating it. And the U.S. took notice. Tensions rose. Trade became a battlefield. Tariffs, taxes on Chinese goods. The U.S. government said China was not playing fair. Too much government control. too many hidden tricks. China answered back. More tariffs, more restrictions. The world watched as the two biggest economies clashed. It was not a war of tanks or bombs. It was a war of money. Tech companies were caught in the middle. The U.S. banned Huawei, afraid its technology could be used for spying. China pushed back, blocking American apps. Microchips became weapons. The U.S. controlled the technology. China needed it. For years, China had depended on American software, American parts, American knowledge. But now, it wanted to build its own. Factories opened. Billions of dollars were spent. China raced to catch up. Would it succeed? Some thought so. China had the money, the workers, the government support. Others were not so sure. The U.S. still led in many areas: innovation, research, military strength. Could China truly take its place? One thing was certain. The rivalry was not just about business. It was about power. Who would lead the world economy? Who would decide the future? For now, the battle continued. Two giants, one market, and no one knew how it would end. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The Fight for Technology. Who controls the future? The lights flickered. Just for a second, barely noticeable. But in a high-security building in Washington, alarms began to flash. A cyber attack. Somewhere, deep in the web, hidden behind layers of code, a silent war was being fought. No bullets, no explosions, just hackers, algorithms, data. The battlefield had changed. For years, the world's great powers had fought on land, in the air, across the seas. But now, the real fight was happening in places no one could see. Technology had become the new weapon. The most powerful weapon. In China, a team of engineers sat in a brightly lit office. The air smelled of coffee, fresh ink, and warm circuits. Screens flashed with numbers, graphs, and designs. They were building the future. 5G networks, artificial intelligence, quantum computing. They had a mission: to make China the world leader in technology. And they were succeeding. Huawei became one of the biggest tech companies on the planet. Its 5G network spread across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Super-fast internet. A connected world. But the U.S. saw a danger. Could China's technology be trusted? Could it be used for spying? For control? Washington made its move, sanctions, bans, restrictions. Huawei was blocked from buying American chips. Chinese apps like TikTok were accused of stealing data. More companies were targeted. China fought back. It started building its own microchips, developing its own software, reducing its dependence on the West. The U.S. still led in many areas. But for how long? Silicon Valley had been the center of global technology for decades. Google, Apple, Microsoft, the biggest names, the most advanced research. But China was catching up. Its engineers worked day and night. Factories opened. Money flowed into AI, semiconductors, and robotics. The battle was no longer just about business. It was about control. Who would lead the future? Who would decide how the world was connected? Hackers entered the fight. Governments accused each other of cyber attacks, data leaks, secret operations. Banks were hacked. Military documents were stolen. Power grids flickered. The internet itself had become a battlefield. And no one knew who would win. Would the world stay open and free, or would it be divided? Two systems, two internets, two separate futures. The fight for technology had just begun, and the whole world was watching. Chapter 7. The South China Sea. A dangerous game of warships. The ocean stretched endlessly, blue and silent. Waves rolled gently under the warm sun. A fisherman cast his net into the water, watching it sink below the surface. The sea had always provided, but now it had become something else, a battlefield. In the distance, a dark shape appeared on the horizon. Then another, and another. Warships. The fisherman felt a chill. He pulled his net back into the boat, his hands tight on the ropes. He had seen them before. Chinese ships, American ships, moving through the water, always watching each other. This was no ordinary sea. It was the South China Sea, one of the most important places on Earth. A place of wealth. Beneath the waves, oil and gas lay hidden. Above, ships carried goods between nations. Billions of dollars in trade passed through these waters every day. But who controlled it? For years, China had made its claim. These waters belong to us. It built islands, small at first, then bigger. Not just sand, but runways. Not just rocks, but military bases. The world watched. The United States responded. Warships entered the sea, sailing close to China's new islands. These waters are free, the U.S. said. No one owns the sea. China disagreed. A game began. Planes circled in the sky. Submarines moved in silence beneath the waves. Battleships floated, their guns pointed but not fired. Each side waited. One wrong move, and everything could explode. In the capital cities, leaders spoke carefully. Diplomats met behind closed doors. But in the sea, it was different. Sailors stood at their posts, watching the radar. Pilots gripped their controls, ready to react. The world's two most powerful militaries standing face to face. Would there be war? A U.S. ship sailed close to one of China's artificial islands. Too close. A warning came over the radio. Turn back. The U.S. ship continued. Chinese jets roared into the sky. Soldiers prepared for orders. But then, silence. The U.S. ship turned away. A message had been sent. A warning given. But for how long? The tension did not fade. China built more bases. The U.S. sent more ships. Other countries joined the dispute: Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia. Each one had its own claim. The sea became crowded, the risk of conflict greater. Would diplomacy find a way? Or was this the beginning of something far worse? The fisherman sat in his boat, staring at the warships. He had no power over them, no voice in this battle. He cast his net again, hoping to catch something. Hoping one day the sea would belong to no one, and to everyone. Chapter 8. The Battle for Influence. Who leads the world? The sun burned high over the desert. A group of workers stood in the heat, sweat rolling down their faces. They lifted heavy steel beams, their hands covered in dust. A new highway was being built, not in China, not in the United States, but in Africa. Far away, in another part of the world, a similar scene unfolded. Cranes rose high in the sky. The sound of hammers echoed through the streets. A new port, a new railway, a new city. China was everywhere. For years, it had built roads, bridges, and power plants across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. It had a name for this project, the Belt and Road Initiative, a new Silk Road, a plan to connect the world to China. The U.S. watched, and it worried. For decades, it had been the leader, the one that helped nations grow, the one that made the rules. But now, China was moving fast, too fast. Billions of dollars flowed out of Beijing. Loans, investments, agreements, countries took the money. They built airports, schools, dams. Some were grateful. China is helping us, they said. Others were afraid. What if we cannot pay? The U.S. did not stay silent. It sent its own money, made its own deals, formed new alliances. A new battle had begun. Not with soldiers, not with weapons, but with influence. Who could offer more? China promised development. Work with us and your country will grow. The U.S. promised freedom. Work with us and you will be safe. Some countries chose China, a fast-growing economy, a partner with no conditions. Others stayed with the U.S., a long-time ally, a leader of democracy. And some? They tried to take from both, balancing between giants. The fight for influence spread across Africa, across Latin America, across Asia, ports in Sri Lanka, railways in Kenya, highways in Brazil. China built them all. Military bases in the Pacific, trade agreements in Europe, new partnerships in India. The U.S. fought to keep its ground. Each side pulled. Each side pushed. Was this the new Cold War? Or was it something even bigger? Leaders spoke carefully. The world watched. Would this competition stay in politics and business? Or would it turn into something more dangerous? No one knew. But one thing was clear. The battle for influence was far from over. And the future of the world? It was being written. Right now. Chapter 9. The War That Almost Happened. Close calls and hidden threats. The pilot gripped the controls, his breath slow, steady. The sky stretched endless before him, blue and silent. But the silence did not bring peace. It was the kind that came before disaster. The plane moved high over the sea. Below, the waters of the South China Sea rippled like glass. The mission was simple. Gather intelligence, return home. Routine, safe. Until the radio crackled. A warning. A voice, sharp and clear. Turn back. Now. The pilot's hands tightened. He looked at the radar. A dot, then another, moving fast, Chinese fighter jets. The U.S. spy plane held course. It was not in China's airspace, but China did not see it that way. Suddenly, a hit, a shock. The plane shook violently. A fighter jet had flown too close. It clipped the wing. The American plane spun. The pilot fighting for control. A disaster. A crisis. The world held its breath. This was not just an accident. This was a test. A message. A moment that could change everything. The year was 2001. The Cold War was over. But tensions between the U.S. and China had not disappeared. They had only changed. The pilot managed to land the damaged plane, but not at home, in China. The crew was taken, held for days. Every hour, the fear grew. Would this turn into war? Behind closed doors, diplomats worked fast. Messages passed in secret. Careful words, promises, deals. Finally, the crew was released. The plane was not. A small price for peace. It was not the first time the world had come this close, and it would not be the last. Years earlier, in 1958, another crisis had unfolded. This time, over Taiwan. China fired missiles, again and again. Taiwan, backed by the U.S., stood firm. War seemed inevitable. The U.S. prepared to act. Would they strike? Would they send troops? Then, A message. A secret note sent between governments. A back-channel agreement. The missiles stopped. The U.S. pulled back. War was avoided, but just barely. Decades passed. More close calls came. A naval standoff in the South China Sea. Cyber attacks traced to hidden sources. A near miss between submarines deep below the water. Each time, war loomed. And each time, something held it back. But for how long? One mistake. One misunderstanding. One moment of bad judgment. And history could take a different path. The question remains, will the next crisis end in peace or in something far worse? The world watches. The world waits. Because the war that almost happened could still be the war that comes next. Chapter 10. The Future. War or peace? The room was silent. A long table stretched between them. On one side, American officials sat with their papers, their pens, their careful expressions. On the other, Chinese diplomats mirrored them, calm, serious, unreadable. Between them lay the future. The words spoken here could shape history. Tensions had never been higher. Trade wars, military standoffs, cyber attacks. Each year, the rivalry grew stronger. Each year, the risks became greater. Could this be solved with words? Or was the world moving towards something else? Outside, the city moved on. People walked to work, scrolled through their phones, sipped their coffee. Planes took off. Ships crossed the seas. Life continued. Most did not think about these meetings, these negotiations, these small moments that could decide everything. But history is often written in whispers. A treaty, a deal, a handshake, or the failure of one. If talks collapsed, what would happen next? Would the two most powerful nations on earth step back, find common ground, or would they step forward into conflict? Some believed war was impossible. Too much to lose. The world was too connected. Trade too important. Economies too fragile. A war would destroy everything. But others disagreed. They pointed to history. Nations had been here before. Great powers had clashed before. And each time, people had said, "It won't happen." Until it did. In the South China Sea, warships moved through the waves. Pilots watched each other from the cockpits of their jets. Soldiers stood on high alert. In Washington, in Beijing, leaders made speeches. Some called for peace. Others called for strength. The world watched. Would the two great powers learn to share? Would they step back before it was too late? Or was a final clash coming? A new Cold War? Or something far worse? The future is unwritten. The decisions have not yet been made. But one thing is certain. The next chapter has not been written. Not yet. And the world is waiting to see how it will end.